It's Pause Family Podcast. Welcome back to this side of it, the family history part. So now we're opened up to anyone who wants to share a story or a little bit, however they want to throw out.
I just had a scripture that goes along with one that Devin said earlier. It is 3rd Nephi 25, 5 and 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. And as I've started doing genealogy, that's exactly what's happened. I've learned to love the people that I've learned about. Whereas before, they were just people that I didn't know anything. I didn't have pictures of them, maybe not even names of them. I just knew that they were my great grandparents, and that was it. But now I have faces and names and stories and so like with my granddad, my grandma would always talk about my granddad. He died before I was born. And she would get her picture books out, and so I got to see what he looked like, and I heard these stories, and so I always felt like I knew him, even though I never met him. My other grandma, my granddad died when my dad was 3, and she put away the pictures and never would talk about him. And so he's like just a guy. I don't know anything about him. And so the difference between my two grandfathers is huge, because the one I know, and I feel like I know him personally, and the other I don't. So it's really important to get to know him.
That's the main thing for me, is like I need to do more looking over that so I can understand it more. Because before you do genealogy, you're just thinking, you're like, this is just, like you said, random people that are my progenitor or ancestors, not progenitors, ancestors, and they. Or is it progenitor?
No, when I was growing up,
but you just don't know them.
In Utah, you always have Pioneer Day, and you'd go to school, and all the kids would talk about their pioneer ancestors, and they were in the Willie Martin handcart companies, or they were this or they were that, and I thought, man, it would be so cool to have ancestors like that. And I didn't think I had anything like that, but then a few years ago when I started doing it, I found out that I do have some that came in that company, and
a lot, if that, we have a lot of them. A lot of our ancestors came through that.
A lot that knew Joseph Smith personally, and it's like so cool, because I'm like, I was so disappointed, and I felt so bad that here all these other people had these stories of the pioneers from Nauvoo and Joseph Smith, and my family didn't have anything. And then I find out years later that, hey, you know what? I actually do, and that's really cool. So.
All right. I want to share a little bit from a story of one of these people that I was looking at through the genealogy. So this guy's name is Lindsey. It sounds like a girl's name, but it's a guy's name for him. Lindsey Anderson Brady. So this guy was born on January 11th, 1811 in Lincoln, Kentucky, and he died on June 26, 1885 in Fairview, St. Peter, Utah. So it was quite a long time for being back in the 1800s there. I knew, with his first wife, because he had a couple other wives, I think one of them might have died, and then he got remarried, or if they both were there. But he was a convert to the church. When he was first introduced to the church, it was like anyone else, where they just, it's around the religious excitement time, 1811, whenever. So the church was already established by the time he had gotten into it. And so there were some missionaries that came to his town. It was Warren Parrish and Wilford Woodruff. What?
Woodruff.
Woodruff. That's a hard name to say. So I thought that was kind of interesting that a soon-to-be prophet was missionary and was able to teach my ancestor here, and they were investigating the church a little bit, and it was Sunday. Probably it was Sunday before church, and his wife and his mother-in-law, I believe, they were very insistent. I think that means that they wanted to go. They wanted to go,
and they wanted him to go and listen to the missionaries.
See, when I first read that, I thought it was saying that they didn't want to go, and he's like, "I want to go." No, they wanted to go. He didn't necessarily want to. So this is the kind of story that was kind of cool that went with him. So his wife was very insistent that they, would go and go to the meeting, hear the missionaries, and so he went to the woods. Took his axe, kind of set it on his shoulder, went into the woods and started chopping on a tree. Kind of cutting down, doing something of that sort. And
his excuse as to why he couldn't go to the meeting. His
excuse not to go to church or go to the meeting is to go get firewood or whatever he was needing to get it for. Anyway, he went and was chopping down this tree, and he heard a voice telling him to lay down the axe and attend the meeting. And he looked around and he was like, there's no one here. Who the heck said that? And so he just I don't know where that came from. I'm just going to obey what the voice said. So he set the axe down and went to the meeting with the church. And then later in the future, he got baptized by Wilford Woodruff again, and I think that's pretty cool. And then later on, he also ordained him a deacon. And around this time, his family disowned him. They didn't want nothing to do with him because he had already getting into the church. And I believe his sister was starting to get interested into the church, but their family persuaded her not to get baptized. I don't know if that meant that she had later on joined the church later on, but I do know that he moved to a place nearby where Nauvoo, before that was even a thing, was going to be built. And then, Nauvoo was starting to become an up-and-coming city, and before it was even started, he kind of moved down to where it was going to start, and because Joseph told people come down to the swamps and let's make this a place. And so he went down, moved in that area, and they started building it. And they were around that time, they were saying that Nauvoo was one of the most attractive cities all around in Illinois itself, and I thought it was kind of cool. He also got to be part of building that up. And then let's see. When Joseph Smith was martyred, one of the cool things is when Brigham was up there talking about the church and everything and was going on to go forward, some people say that they saw Joseph Smith in voice, and kind of maybe some said they saw him embodied where Brigham, he just kind of looked like him and sounded like him. He did say that he was in that meeting, and I believe he did see Joseph Smith and or heard his voice coming out of Brigham. And the last interesting detail I had there is while in Nauvoo, they had 3 more children. So, and there's a lot more you can, this is why it's cool to do genealogy. You got to look into that and hear all these different stories about ancestors that you just don't know about. It's really cool. Anybody else?
I can go. So Clara Walker was our great grandma.
What was her name?
Flora. And so Flora got really sick with influenza. She was rushed to the emergency hospital where her mom was the head nurse, so she got the best treatment possible. And her husband and her mother never left her side. And so after a week, she started to feel better. But then she started feeling several sharp pains in her head, and then she died. And also, she was born in Kansas on February 2nd, 1892, and then she died in Utah. And she traveled to Utah when she was just a little girl.
Cool. So you say that she died from what?
From the flu. It was during the flu
Okay,
epidemic.
because she had said felt sharp pains and then
Yeah,
she died.
so it said
You
on
said
the
it really
thing,
quickly. She died.
it said on the thing that she got influenza
Mm-hmm.
and she was starting to get better, and then
And then
for
she got
whatever reason,
pneumonia. And so between the two, it killed her. And she had 3 little kids.
All right.
Devin, you want to go?
Yeah, now that I got everything back. Okay, the first person I have is Ralph D Stanford, 1st Earl of Stanford, and 2nd Baron of Stanford. So Ralph was born on September 24th, 1301. And he lost his birth father at the age of 7 because his father died. I found it neat that because he's also related to him on my mom's side,
That was okay.
as well as on my dad's side.
Okay, cool.
That's like he was part of government and military.
And dragons.
No.
Languages? Sure. Yeah, I can. So this one I'm gonna do is Orville Morgan Allen. He is my great grandfather. 3 greats, I believe. He joined the church in 1838 when they were in Missouri. He was born in 1805. Let's see. He moved to Nauvoo in 1840, and around then he started to be involved with. He was a bodyguard for Joseph Smith, and he also worked on the construction of the Nauvoo Temple. A few years later, I don't remember the year, doesn't quite say, but he was called by President Brigham Young to go back to the Mississippi and help a group of saints who did not have any transportation or any of that. And this is an interesting story, just a little quick one. When he entered the camp early in the morning, he saw the poverty and the suffering of these poor saints. After informing them that they had come to help them move west, he promised them if they would keep the commandments and not complain, that they would go to the Rocky Mountains in safety, even if they had to be fed on quail. While he was still speaking, they heard a roaring sound like the wind. Suddenly, there was a flock of quail just at sunrise, settling in their camp. People reached out, picked them up like they were tame. After getting all they needed for breakfast, the remainder of the quail flew away. Some people tried to follow and shoot them, but Orville commanded the people to let the quail go unmolested, not to kill more than they could eat. So it's interesting because I really like that short little story because, they were suffering. They were obviously not at best they could be. And he got there saying, we'll get it, even if, it means we'll eat quail. And all of a sudden, boom, they're all there. They get what they're able to do. And I don't know. I thought it was my favorite part about him, though, is just, he was there with Joseph Smith, bodyguard, and, at one point he was thrown in jail with him, too. And
yeah, that story with the quail is well known, too. In fact, it's called The Miracle of the Quail.
yeah,
So that's a cool story.
it is.
Just like the miracle of the seagulls.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I have on him, so.
So I have a story about my third great uncle. He spent a lot of time with Joseph Smith. I think I might just read it because it's not very long. His name was Abraham Wilsey. He was born the 6th of September in 1814 in Canada. He was the eldest child in a family of 9. They joined the church and were encouraged to join the saints in Zion. They made the long trek to Kirtland, Ohio, and joined the body of the church there. They experienced all the persecutions that the saints suffered until they were forced to flee from Nauvoo to the Rocky Mountains. Abraham was baptized a member of the church in 1838, just 8 years after it was organized, and remained a faithful member all his life. While living in Nauvoo, he often worked on the church farm. It was while working here that he became intimately acquainted with the prophet Joseph Smith. The prophet often worked on the farm, and he and Abraham worked side by side. They had many wonderful discussions about the gospel principles, and Abraham always said that he knew that Joseph Smith was indeed a prophet of God. One day, while Abraham and two men were talking on the street corner in Nauvoo, the prophet and the stranger passed by in a buggy. Later, Joseph told Abraham that the stranger was one of the three Nephites. So I thought that was really cool that he got to see one of the three Nephites, even though at the time that he saw him, he didn't know it, but to find out later, I mean, how cool would that have been? Oh, by the way, you know who I was talking to? One of the three Nephites. That would, really cool. So.
It's really cool.
Man, if I could know who one of the three Nephites were, at least what they kind of looked like, I'd be like looking out for them, like, you are it. Just ask him. So what was it like in the dark ages when the gospel wasn't on the earth? How was teaching about Christ then? When knights and stuff were killing people with swords, and did they come like slashing you and like, why aren't you dead? And just like cut you in half. Cause you can't. Snap his fingers and just be healed. That guy's like, okay, I gotta believe in Jesus. I just wonder how it would have been like.
Alright. My ancestor's name is James Craig, and he is my great-great-great-grandfather. And I have a little bio here. James Craig was born in Clare County, Ireland in 1821. The first record in the U.S. was of his baptism on April 8, 1844 in Nauvoo, which was listed in the first quorum of the 70s book, page 119. He was ordained February 8, 1851 as a 70. And the family tradition was that his parents were planning to emigrate and got as far as England and died in a cholera epidemic. He was one of the original pioneers arriving in the valley with Brigham Young on the 24th of July. He was the bugler for that group, and his bugle is in the Church History Museum in Salt Lake City. He was a member of the 6th 10, of which Charles Shumway was captain. 1 month later, he was on the road again with the leader, going back to winter quarters. He apparently married while there, for we find his son Daniel born in 1849 in Nebraska. After his arrival in the Salt Lake Valley the second time, he located in Mill Creek and was a member of a company called to assist in exterminating reptiles, birds, and dangerous animals. In the 1851 census of Utah, he is found with a wife and 2 children. His second child, Mary Ann, later married an older man in polygamy. November 2nd, 1867, Alexander Finley, who had lived neighbors to them in Mill Creek. Although both families were later in southern Utah, where apparently they met again, she being much younger than Alexander, and she living with a mean stepmother. On June 28, 1854, General Conference, the following persons were appointed to go on missions. James Craig to Ireland. His daughter Eliza Jane was born 6 months after he left on his mission, assuming he left shortly after his call. He served for a short time in Great Britain as president of the Preston Conference. Later, he labored in Ireland, his native land. He returned from his mission in 1858, and in 1861 was called to assist in establishing settlements in southern Utah. In time, he located at Santa Clara, where he raised cotton with considerable success, and where he died March 2nd, 1868. His wife, Margaret, had died 5 years before, on January 1st, 1863, after a lingering illness of 3 months. James had sealed to him on 14 November 1863, Caroline Ann Bailey and Anne Mary Smeal for time. The same year his wife Margaret died. Joseph Hiram says that their stepmother was mean to them, so he and James Mormon left home, and after their father died, he and James went back for the rest of the kids and took them with him to Panguitch. Their younger brother, Manasseh, died in 1877 in Escalante, age 16, and was buried in a black coffin indicating he had broken the law. Ephraim never married and died in 1929, age 70. Daniel was 12 in the 1860 census and was never early family group sheets. He was never even listed. Apparently he died in Santa Clara, but no record was found. Eliza Jane, James Mormon, and Joseph Hiram all became early settlers of Arizona with their spouses. And one thing I found really interesting about that, aside from his bugle being in the Church History Museum, was that his family wound up in Panguitch and Escalante, which is where I grew up. I didn't even know that they were there until I married Holly. So I lived between Panguitch and Escalante, right between the two in Bryce Canyon area in Utah.
Okay, so my great grandpa, so basically when he worked in the mines and he also smoked, and basically the doctor told him that if he stopped smoking, he was gonna die, and if he didn't stop smoking, he was gonna die. And so then the bishop of this ward told him that he was allowed to go into the temple, and he told the bishop that he wasn't going to go in the temple, that if he was going to go in, that he was going to do it right. That's all I know. I think it's cool.
It is a cool and interesting story.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention, and it's cool how Brian, your ancestor there that had the bugle that's actually in the museum. I forgot to mention for Lindsey Anderson, he did actually make a bed that ended up in a museum. I don't know if it was like a church history museum, but an 1800 style bed. So that's kind of cool that got thrown in a museum. The only other person that I have that I did a little bit of work on, but there wasn't a whole lot in that I had gotten the chance to cover, was his dad, and at the most part I only got his name, where he was born, and where he died, which in itself is kind of interesting. So his dad's name was Thomas Anderson Brady. A lot of these people have the same middle name, Anderson, unless it's part of the last name. He was born in April 18th, 1775, and they said in these days they would call it King George Country, Virginia, USA. And he died in July 1858. And here's the kind of interesting part about it. So he died in the city of Texas, in the county of Washington, in Kentucky. So when I first read it, because it didn't specify city, county, and state, so it's like you read it as died July 1858, Texas, Washington, Kentucky. And I'm like, geez, this dude split himself into threes and died in each one at the same time. Anyway, that was kind of cool, interesting. Didn't know Kentucky had a Texas city or with a Washington County.
Another one of our ancestors is King Henry III, King of England. And not really much to say about a King of England since everyone knows everything about them.
Who was it?
Far backing it up in history.
It's cool that you can find those though, right?
Yeah, and
you can go back far enough to find out.
Yeah, and the his mother is not English. And none of his predecessors either. I cannot read these names.
Okay.
So I have another ancestor named George Edwin Redd, who is my great-great-grandfather. George Edwin Redd was born in New Harmony, Kane County, now Washington, Utah, on December 7th, 1878. He was the seventh child of Lemuel Hardison and Soraya Louisa Chamberlain Redd. He spent his early childhood in New Harmony on the family farm. In 1890, when he was 11 years old, the family moved to Bluff, San Juan County, Utah. where they lived for about 2 years. Then, due to harassment from the U.S. Marshals because of religious beliefs, they moved to the little Mormon town of Colonia Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. The Red family endured many hardships when they first moved to Mexico, but later they became quite prosperous and built one of the best homes in the town. In his teenage years, George met a young lady by the name of Lydia Caroline Taylor and courted her until he was called on a mission for the church. He served in the Central States, spending most of his time in and around Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska. On his release, George's future bride met him in Salt Lake City, where they were married in the Salt Lake Temple, April 7th, 1902. They attended April conference, then returned to Colonial Juarez by train to make their home in a small house belonging to his brother Bert on the east side of town. Here their first 2 sons were born, George Edwin Jr. and Kenneth Taylor. And Kenneth Taylor is my great-grandfather. Sometime in late 1905, George decided to move his family to Raymond, Alberta, Canada, and try raising wheat. The first year was good, but the second year they were hailed out, and George went to work at the sugar factory. The cold weather was very hard to adjust to, so Lydia went back to Colonial Juarez for the birth of Mary, a little redhead, March 16, 1906. When she was 6 weeks old, they returned to Canada, but later the family journeyed back to Mexico about 1907. At one time when George was working on a ranch about 25 miles from Colonial Juarez, he came near death when a bronco horse he was riding threw him against a fence post, injuring his head severely. He was in a coma for 11 days. The bishop, stake president, and counselors held a prayer circle for him, and he soon recovered with only a slight disability in his left arm. It was a miracle. On December 16, 1907, another beautiful baby girl was born, whom they named Marguerite. She lived only a year, dying on Christmas Eve, 1908, of pneumonia. They were living at the field 3 miles from town and were alone with her at the time. It was a sad Christmas. Lamar joined the family December 5, 1909. He was his father's pride and joy. During these years, George prospered well in Colonial Juarez, running his small farm and other land that he rented. He had several head of good cows, teams, saddle horses, and a new wagon. Then in 1912 came the revolution, and the Mormon people were advised by the church authorities to leave Mexico. On Sunday morning, July 26, 1912, George loaded his family and 4 children with bedrolls and a trunk into the wagon and drove around the block to George Romney's to pick up his wife, George's sister Messiah, or Messia, something like that, and children. They drove 10 miles south to the town of Pearson, where the women and children boarded the train for El Paso, Texas. The men returned to Colonial Juarez, rounded up the horses, and got their wagons ready to leave for the United States if they were advised to go. On the way back, they had been held up by some Mexican red flaggers and robbed of their money. George lost $20, but later some lawmen brought it back to him. A week or so later, the men were advised to leave, and after a hard trip, reached Las Cruces, New Mexico. George left his team and wagon there and went to join his family in El Paso. His red beard had grown long, and the children, not knowing him, hid behind the bed when they first saw him. George moved his family into a house and found a job in a bakery, working nights. He worked for several months until his boss found out he was a Mormon and fired him. Their son, Verl Chester, was born in El Paso, December 27, 1912. Early in 1913, George and his family, with several others, returned to Colonial Juarez to find everything pretty much as they had left it the year before. The revolution had eased up, but there were still many renegade soldiers around. At about 3 a.m. on February 9, 1914, some of these outlaws came to the corral and were driving the cows away. George and Lydia's brother, Adalbert Taylor, went out to try to stop them. They left, but came back a short time later. George went out the back way, and it being bright moonlight, the Mexicans saw him. They shouted, "We are going to kill you," and commenced firing. One bullet entered his leg, severing a large artery. Seeing him fall, the Mexicans ran. Lydia saw the whole thing from the window. She ran out and found the wound bleeding profusely. Uncle J. Robinson went in the buggy to Casas Grandes, 17 miles away, to get the doctor, but by the time he arrived, George had lost too much blood and succumbed shortly after. He was 36 years of age and left Lydia, 33, with 5 children. Sometime later, Lydia discovered she was going to have another baby, who turned out to be a healthy little red-headed girl to be named Nora. The baby gave Lydia much comfort at the tragic time in her life. George was a wonderful man, a good husband, father, and Latter-day Saint. His children have beautiful and fond memories of him. Later, Lydia married a good man, Richard Durkee, who helped raise her 6 children. 2 children, Herman and Ethel, were born to this union. Lydia was proud of her family and loved them dearly. She passed away at 90. George's posterity includes 4 sons, 3 daughters, 1 deceased, 27 grandchildren, 74 great-grandchildren, and 14 great-great-grandchildren. Now, growing up, I didn't know, obviously I didn't know George because he died, but I do remember Lydia. And she was Durkee, her second husband. So she was Grandma Durkee when I was growing up. And actually I have a 5-generation picture with her before she died, so it's pretty cool.
5 generation.
Mm-hmm.
Sheesh.
It was me and my dad's mom, her dad. It was Kenneth Taylor Red, his son, and then her.
Jeez.
Dang.
I think I was about 2 or 3.
Okay, so I have a few stories. I'm just going to tell by memory from my dad's mom and her parents. My third great grandmother, she joined the church, and shortly after they joined the church, they were told they needed to practice polygamy, and she hated the thought of doing it so much that she wanted to die. But it took her some time, and she came around, and then she decided that it was a true principle, and that she wanted to live it. And so she married in secret for a year before she told anyone that she was married. And she had to go in hiding with her sister wife. And her husband was told he had to go to court, and he was told either to only have one wife or leave the county and never come back. And so while he was trying to prepare to go west, they had to hide in this little rundown, like horse shed that was really drafty and cold, and she was going to have a baby, and the night that she went into labor and stuff, they didn't know what to do because they were alone, and it was a stormy night, and there was a knock on the door, and when they opened it, there was a lady, and she asked if she'd come in and help them with whatever they needed help with, and then they talked with her, and she came in, and she told them that she could help them deliver this baby, and so she did, and she helped get everything squared away, and after the baby was born, and she left, and this lady they had never seen before or after, and so they think it was a ministering angel that came. They also washed clothes for all the men that were going to the gold mines. They were on the path to the California gold rush thing, and a lot of them would come by, and they washed clothes to help take care of their needs. And one guy said that they had stole a coin that was in his pants, and so they prayed, and my grandmother went out and looked for it, and she was able to find it in the dirt and give it back to the guy so that they didn't end up hurting them. And my other grandmother, great-grandmother, they were out where the Indians were, and this chief kept wanting to marry her, and he would bring her all these gifts and just barge into the house and set all these gifts on the table, and he says, "You be my squaw," and she's like, "No, I can't do that." And he came 2 or 3 times, and she says, "I can't," and he's like, "Well, why not?" And she says, "Because I married this person who was actually her sister's husband." And he says, "Well, we'll see about that, because guy was very well known and was known for his honesty. And so the Indians left, and she hurried and went to my great-great-grandfather and said, I told the Indians that I was your wife so that I wouldn't have to marry him and they wouldn't take me away. And so he says, okay, well, guess there's nothing to be done but to get married. So they went to Brigham Young, and Brigham Young married him that day. And so I have one other just little story on my mother's side. I think she's also my third great grandmother. Her name was Elizabeth Rebecca Brady, and she was born on May 6th. And the reason why this is so cool to me is because my second son was born on May 6th, and I named him Brady. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, I did not know, I hadn't done any genealogy at that time, but I think there was a reason that he was named Brady. So genealogy is really important, and once you get going on it, it's addictive and it's fun, and there's so many treasures that you can find when you do it, and there's a lot of blessings. And I just want to bear my testimony of that to you, and that you will see the blessings and grow to love your ancestors if you take the time to look into it and do your genealogy. And a good site to go on is Family Search. It's free. And they have added some new things lately. And one of the things that they've added is activities to do. And if you click on the activities, there's where am I from? And that will go in and give you percentages from your ancestors, like 18% German or 20% England or 80% whatever. So that's really cool. And then they have a compare a face. You can take a picture and they will compare you, and you can get a percentage of how closely you look like one of your ancestors. And there are a few other activities, so that's really cool. But again, I just want to bear you my testimony of the blessings that you will get as you do genealogy, and how your hearts will be turned to your ancestors, and the love for them will grow. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
All right, guys. Just wanted to tell you that next week, our podcast that we're going to be doing will be centered on covenant Israel and what the Lord has promised them that he would do for them. And keep in mind, this is something that President Nelson invited us to do just about 5-6 months ago, to be studying in our scriptures. So anything you take away from us, I'll put sources of possibility, things that you guys can check out so you can learn a little bit more on the different covenants that Israel had promised. That way you guys can learn for yourself on these different things. So tune in next week.